Before we begin today's story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel if you enjoy emotionally driven stories that stay with you long after the video ends. These stories aren't loud or rushed, they quietly settle into your heart. At 11:42 p.m., my husband looked at me and said, "Okay, invite her." In that instant, I realized I had just crossed an emotional boundary I wasn't prepared for. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I just nodded. I had expected hesitation or confusion from him, maybe even a question, but not quiet agreement. Calm, steady, yet heavy with meaning. This idea didn't come out of nowhere. Weeks earlier, I received a message from my younger sister. "I don't feel like I belong anywhere anymore." No emojis. No follow-up. Just that sentence, sitting in my mind like a shadow. We grew up close, sharing rooms, secrets, and small moments, but we were also different. I sought stability, she chased change. That night, I realized my life was predictable and safe, while hers was uncertain and restless. The thought struck me suddenly. What if offering support and care isn't enough unless I act now? I let it sit with me for a couple of days. Eventually, I tested the idea out loud after dinner. "What would you say if she came to stay for a while?" I asked casually. He didn't look up. "How long?" "I'm not sure. A few weeks, maybe longer." He nodded. "She's family." That should have been the end, but it wasn't. I had something deeper I wanted to communicate. A few nights later, I spoke honestly. She doesn't just need a place. She needs support. She needs us. He looked at me attentively. "Are you asking me or telling me?" I didn't know. I wanted him to decide. I wanted a clear yes or no. Instead, he asked softly, "Will this change things?" "Yes," I admitted. "I think it might." "Will it be difficult?" he asked. "I don't know," I whispered. Then he said simply, "Okay, invite her." That was the moment everything shifted. Not when she arrived, but when we both stepped into something new without stepping back. 5 minutes after sending the message, her reply appeared. "Are you sure?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. My husband watched quietly from across the room, as if he already knew this was bigger than just a visit. "Yes," I typed back. That night I didn't sleep. Not from excitement, but from the weight of what was about to happen. I realized I wasn't just inviting my sister into our home. I was opening a space my marriage had never been tested in before. She arrived early on Tuesday afternoon, 2 hours before she said she would. I remember the exact time because I was standing at the sink, hands in soapy water, rehearsing a calm version of myself for when the doorbell rang. My husband was still at work. That wasn't part of the plan. None of this was supposed to happen without witnesses. When I opened the door, she stood there with one suitcase and a tote bag that had clearly seen better days. Her hair was shorter than the last time I had seen her, and her smile came quickly, almost like she was trying to outrun her own worries. "Hey," she said, stepping inside. She hugged me tightly, the kind of hug that doesn't ask permission. I smelled cold air and unfamiliar detergent on her clothes and something else beneath it. Restlessness, maybe relief. "I came early," she said, closing the door. I didn't want to change my mind. Then she laughed lightly, but didn't look at me when she said it. I showed her the guest room, the same one we had always called the office because no one stayed long enough to need a bed. She dropped her bags on the floor and sat on the edge of the mattress, exhaling like she'd been holding her breath for days. "This is nice," she said quietly. "You've done well." There was something in her tone that made my chest tighten. Not envy, not admiration, but disbelief. I made coffee, and we sat at the table talking about neutral things, traffic, weather, the drive over. Neither of us mentioned why she was really here. It felt like circling a hole in the floor, careful not to fall through. Eventually, she asked about my husband, not casually. "When does he get home?" "Around 6, I replied. She nodded, silently counting the hours. The room felt different with her there, every sound louder, every shadow noticeable. When my husband finally walked in, the moment landed harder than I expected. He froze for half a second when he saw her, then smiled, polite, measured, and kind in a way that meant he was paying attention. "So this is the famous sister," he said, setting his bag down. She stood immediately, smoothed her shirt, and returned the smile. "I've heard a lot about you," she said. They shook hands, a simple gesture. Yet I noticed the subtle awareness between them. The way she held on a fraction too long. The way he noticed without reacting. Dinner was fine. Too fine. No tension anyone could point to. But a quiet current ran beneath every sentence. She laughed at his jokes faster than I did, and he listened to her stories with the same care he usually reserved just for me. Later that night, after she went to bed, my husband sat beside me on the couch. "She's different than I expected," he said quietly. I didn't ask how. I just nodded, feeling the days ahead rearranging our home rhythm in small, unpredictable ways. The days that followed her arrival quietly rearranged our home. She woke early, filling the house with small movements, making breakfast, tidying up, and bringing energy that wasn't there before. My husband started coming home earlier than usual, seemingly drawn into the changes she brought. I noticed because I was counting the hours, watching how our routines shifted. They talked while I answered emails or prepared meals. They laughed while I folded laundry. Nothing inappropriate. Just subtle signs of connection and familiarity that made me hyper-aware of my own presence. One evening, I walked into the kitchen and found them standing close together, looking at something on his phone. When they noticed me, they stepped apart at the same moment. My heart raced, though nothing had happened. That night, lying in bed, my husband reached for my hand. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I said too quickly. He didn't press, but he didn't let go either. 3 days in, my sister asked a question I wasn't ready for. "Did you mean it?" she said, washing dishes beside me. "When you said I could stay as long as I need?" The question sat between us, heavy and loaded. "Yes," I said. "Why?" she shrugged almost casually. "Just making sure." Later, when I caught my reflection in the darkened window, I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. The person staring back carried a mix of relief, uncertainty, and a quiet realization that our family dynamic had shifted. Life in the house had changed. Small things. A cup left on the counter, laughter from the kitchen. The way my husband smiled at her stories felt bigger than they were. Everything seemed amplified, yet still ordinary. I realized that inviting her in wasn't just about providing a place to stay. It was about stepping into something new. A part of life I hadn't fully understood until it was happening. And though nothing inappropriate had occurred, the house felt different, as if the walls themselves were listening. I didn't know what the next week would bring, but I understood one thing. Family ties, even the ones we think are simple, can quietly test us in ways we never expect. By the 4th day, the house felt different, warmer, fuller, yet strangely fragile. Her presence brought energy, but also a quiet tension that hovered just beneath the surface. She started asking small questions about our routines. "Do you always cook this early? How long have you had that plant?" Each question seemed harmless, but it made me realize how much I had taken my familiar life for granted. That my husband continued to interact with her with patience and attentiveness, the kind reserved for important conversations. I noticed, but I told myself it was normal. After all, she was family. One evening, we all sat in the living room. She shared a story from her recent struggles, simple, honest, and unpolished. My husband listened, nodding, asking gentle questions. The conversation flowed naturally, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this quiet closeness was shifting our household rhythm, that I found myself observing small gestures. The way she smiled at him, the way he responded with care, the way laughter echoed a little longer than usual. Nothing inappropriate happened, but the subtle changes were impossible to ignore. Later that night, I spoke to my sister alone. "Are you comfortable here?" I asked softly. "Yes," she replied, almost too quickly. "It's different but good." Her answer lingered in my mind. Different but good. It wasn't just a description of the house. It was a reflection of the quiet adjustments we were all making, learning to share space, attention, and emotions in new ways. As days passed, I realized how much our lives had subtly shifted. I had invited her for support, but what I hadn't expected was how much we would all learn from her presence. The patience, the care, and the small moments that matter the most. Sometimes change doesn't come with a bang. Sometimes it sneaks in quietly, through shared coffee in the morning, laughter over small stories, and conversations that stretch into the night. And that's when I understood. Family isn't just about blood. It's about learning to adapt, to support, and to notice the little ways someone's presence can reshape a home and a heart. Sometimes, the smallest changes bring the biggest lessons. Thank you for watching. Remember to cherish the people who quietly shape your life.